are starting a new message series through the month of June and July, Summertime Mixtape. And so this is basically a bunch of different topics, many of them that was suggested by the congregation. And so the very first one that we're going to hit today is reasons to believe in God. What are some reasons for somebody to believe in God, right? And so probably some of you are thinking, I mean, what is this? I'm here. I believe in God, right? But how many of you know somebody who maybe doesn't believe in God? Maybe someone in your family, right? Maybe somebody that you work with, maybe a neighbor. And so one of the reasons for this is to sort of give us maybe some things that you might be able to think upon yourself. But then maybe you have someone, maybe a skeptic in your life who would ask you, why do you believe in God? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Have you ever had a teacher or professor who made a difficult and or boring subject appealing to you? Perhaps that professor made it interesting or taught it in a way that made you at least think you could learn the topic. Have you ever had a professor or a teacher like that? I know I have. And back in my time at Manhattan Christian College, I had some incredible professors during the time that I was there. Now, over time, I have come to appreciate all of those professors in one way or another. But at the time when I was a student, I certainly had my favorites, and one of my favorites was my theology professor. Theology is basically thinking and talking about God. It's the study of God. And his name, we'll call him Dr. Barry. That wasn't his real name, but his name was Dr. Barry. And I had friends who had classes with Dr. Barry before I did. And I always heard how much they loved his classes. They loved his style of teaching. Beyond his style of teaching and how he taught, his appearance was just awesome. Like, he wasn't what you would think a theology professor would look like. And I don't even know what a theology professor should look like, but I didn't imagine it would be this guy. He had a really nice, bald, shiny head, which is already a very good start. He had a big goatee, a big gray goatee, just kind of out like this, you know. And he had, at least one of his arms was fully tatted all the way up. I mean, you couldn't see any skin. It was a tattoo sleeve on his arm all the way up to his shoulders. And so, you know, just that alone. And then some days, he rode his motorcycle to the college. This was a theology professor, and he just looked cool. He looked like someone that I wanted to learn theology from. He was incredibly brilliant. He was confident in the subject matter, and he also was humble about what he knew. Dr. Barry was witty, he was sarcastic, and he said things in ways that made me think about it for the first time, even though I had grown up in the church. Dr. Barry was sort of the professor that attracted all of the rebel students, which sort of intimidated me because I wasn't the rebel student. And I know you're shocked. I see the shocked faces. Look on your faces right now that I wasn't the rebel student. But all of the ones who said things that shouldn't be said in class, or the ones that were a little more edgy and stuff, they were the ones that really flocked to Dr. Barry. Most other professors, they started every class throughout the entire semester with prayer. But Dr. Barry said, we're gonna believe that God is big enough to cover all of the classes that we're gonna have throughout the entire semester. So he said, we're going to pray one time at the beginning of the semester, and that's it. And y'all, coming from a Pentecostal background where you're praying for every single thing, I was like, what in the world? What kind of stuff is this? It was a mind-blowing thought to me, but that was Dr. Barry. In addition to taking Christian doctrine with him, I had classes with him on the Holy Spirit. One class was called Jesus and Film, and it looked at a bunch of movies that had either Jesus-type figures in them. And then finally, the one that we're going to talk a little bit about today was Christian apologetics. Christian apologetics. Now, apologetics comes from the Latin word apologia, and it means basically a defense of one's opinions, position, or actions. So apologia, I would assume most of you engage in apologia every single day, and you probably didn't know it. And not necessarily just about religion, but on a variety of different things. So Christian apologetics, then, is a defense of the Christian faith that appeals to philosophy, reason, science, to build sort of a plausible case for the existence of God to the person who's asking, is there a God? And so Dr. Barry's Christian apologetics class began not with a defense of Christianity itself, but with the very idea that there is a God. So Dr. Barry explained to us in apologetics class the first step for someone to come to believe in God who might be an atheist is to first get them to believe that it's even possible that God exists in the first place, right? And so once you can get someone to believe that there is a creator, that there is a higher power, then it's a smaller step for them to believe in a God, to then believe in who we say is God revealed in the person of Jesus of Nazareth, as we would say is revealed to us in the Scriptures. And so this morning, I want to share some reasons to believe in God. And as I say that, understand that these reasons that we're going to look at, they aren't anything new. I'm not making up anything just out of my own brain. So before you say, Ben, you're so smart, this is stuff, I'm just talking about what others have been talking about for hundreds, even thousands of years. Christian thinkers and philosophers and theologians have been talking about these ideas for a long time. And atheists and Christians have debated over these reasons for the existence of God for a long time. And so, first, just a little caution as we get ready to talk about some of these reasons to believe in God. And the caution is that Christian apologetics is just one tool that God may use to lead someone to faith. But at some point in someone's journey of coming to proclaim that Jesus is the Messiah, at some point, they're going to have to leave reason and they're going to have to make a jump of faith, right? And so Christian apologetics, there's a lot of reason and science and philosophy behind it, but at some point, someone's going to have to jump off the ledge and say, I'm not going to know everything there is to know, but I believe in God. I believe in Jesus. The Hebrew author writes in Hebrews 11:6 that without faith, it is impossible to please God. Because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Remember Jesus' words at the end of the Gospel of John when Jesus is talking to doubting Thomas, and Thomas didn't believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and Jesus invited him to touch his resurrected body. But then John 20:29, this is like the end of the book, Jesus says, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Who would that include today? That's all of us in this room. Blessed are you, for you haven't seen God. You didn't see Jesus walk in the flesh, yet you believe. And so, even though we're going to talk about reasons to believe in God, mental reasons to believe in God, we cannot and we will never, ever discount the role that faith plays in our walk with Jesus. About 6 years after graduating from Manhattan Christian College, Dr. Barry, the professor who I came to love and admire, who taught me everything that I knew up to that point about Christian apologetics and Christian doctrine, he resigned from the college after admitting that he was no longer a Christian. In fact, he was no longer a theist. He said he was an atheist. This was something that, okay, here's a guy who's been teaching Christian apologetics for 15 plus years, and to this day he's an atheist, right? And so before you think that this is a foolproof way to get somebody to believe in God, understand someone can teach these very things and then come to the conclusion that God doesn't exist. And so I say all of that to say, for the person who has hardened their heart and has decided in their mind that there is no God, there is no argument that will convince them otherwise. Because what the atheist is looking for is the kind of concrete proof of God's existence that would negate faith altogether. And my friends, that's just not how this works. And so for those who have eyes to see, those who are willing to take some things on faith, there are some reasons, or we'll call them clues today. And some of the material that I'm taking, I want to show you the book in case anyone is interested in reading this book. But from chapters 8 and 9 of Tim Keller's book, The reason for God. What a title on a day. Oh, I guess it's on the screen too. The reason for God, right? We're talking about reasons for God. So this is a great book if anyone wants to really dive into some more meat. And then there's another one, if anyone would like to. This one really goes into some technical things about the creation of the universe and science. This is called The Language of God, and it's from Dr. Francis Collins. I would highly recommend it to anybody who really wants to dig into some things with any curiosities that you have. But so now, for now, the first clue that we're going to talk about today is the mysterious bang. The Big Bang, right? You don't have to be too uptight with that. This is called, another argument, or another name for this is called the cosmological argument. The cosmological argument. The thought behind this clue or reason for God goes all the way back to Greek philosopher Aristotle. Is that a name that rings a bell with anybody in this place? So Aristotle, he reasoned that nothing comes from nothing. Makes sense, right? Nothing comes from nothing. And so he posited that all things that exist because something before it existed. You tracking with me this morning? If something exists, it only exists because something before it existed and had something to do with it. Think about, has anyone set up like a chain of dominoes before? Where you kind of start over here and you build this long train of dominoes. And what do you have to do to get all of them to fall? You have to knock down that first domino somewhere, right? And so that's this idea, this cosmological idea. There had to have been a first cause. Does that make sense to you this morning? There cannot be an infinite amount of first causes. Something or someone had to have started this whole thing. And so if you went home today and you found a PB&J sitting on your counter that you did not make, what would you believe about the existence of that PB&J? Would you believe that it all just assembled itself? Or maybe would you say there's somebody in this house that made the PB&J? How strange, right? I know you have to take a little bit of faith to believe in that, but it takes a little more faith to say that PB&J just assembled itself and is right there ready. Although I would say if that did happen and no one did make a PB&J and it was on the counter, I'd just say it's a gift from God, right? You just take it by faith and just enjoy it. Good and faithful Christians throughout the centuries have disagreed about how old the earth is. That's been a debate amongst Christians for a long time. What all Christians have affirmed throughout the centuries is that we believe in God the Father, creator of heaven and earth. And I like what the Nicene Creed says. It goes on to say, of all that is seen and unseen. We believe in a creator, in a God, and a Father who created everything that we see and everything that we don't see. Paul says in Colossians 1:16 through 17, for in him, in God, all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So who is that first cause? Most scientists today, whether Christian or atheist, would say that the universe indeed had an origin. Right? Most scientists, whether Christian or atheist, would say that there's an origin point, there's a starting point that the universe is now expanding out from that origin point. And so for the one who doesn't believe in God, the question is, what was before this origin point of the universe? How did all of this come to be is a question that we might ask. So for those who believe in a creator, maybe we might say, in the beginning, God said, finish it for me, let there be light, right? So it's not a mystery to those who believe, who have eyes to see, that it doesn't take a lot of faith to believe that there is a creator. There's a source, there's an origin who pushed down that first domino. And everything that we see today is because of that creator. I don't have a problem with calling it the Big Bang because I imagine there were a few loud explosions in the process of creating the universe when God said, let there be light, and light raced out into the universe at the speed of light. Pretty amazing that light is as fast as light. Think about that for a second, right? So that's clue number one. It's the cosmological. It's the Big Bang. Something started. Something caused that first explosion, right? Clue number two is the cosmic welcome mat. How many of you have a welcome mat out in front of your door? Because you want people to think you're hospitable, right? And you got a little welcome mat. This is the idea. It's also called the fine-tuning argument. And the best way to describe the welcome cosmic mat or the fine-tuning argument is that in order for life to exist on planet Earth, it's as if there are a bunch of dials that were put at just the right position. We're talking hundreds, thousands, perhaps millions of dials, and this is all scientific stuff, I'm not just making this up, that are just at the right place to create and allow for life to actually happen on planet Earth. And so we have to say, was that just an accident, or is there, you think about, how many of you remember tuning a radio with a dial? And how many of you remember those, like you found a station that you wanted to listen to, but just a little bit to the left, and it's too much static, and a little bit to the right, there's too much, it's like a small little amount of, you have to get it just right. And so that's what we call the fine-tuning argument. If just one of these hundreds, thousands, millions of dials were off by just a smidge, my friends, life is not possible on planet Earth. Tim Keller writes in the book that I mentioned earlier today, he says, for organic life to exist, the fundamental regularities and constants of physics, the speed of light, gravitational constant, the strength of the weak and strong nuclear forces, I have no idea what we're talking about right now, must all have values that together fall into an extremely narrow range. I'm going to take the scientist's word on this. The probability, get this, the probability of this perfect calibration happening by chance is so tiny as to be statistically negligible. Do you smell what we're cooking up here today? That there's all of these dials, all of these things that are just right, these conditions that are just right, that allow for humans to thrive and to live. And if just one of these is off to the left or the right by just a smidge, no life exists. Even late atheist thinker and author Stephen Hawking said this. He said, the odds against a universe like ours emerging out of something like the Big Bang are enormous. I think there are clearly religious implications. Okay, so again, there are many atheists who have their rebuttals against any of these arguments, but for those who have eyes to see, for those who are willing to take some things on faith, taken with the first arguments, someone who doesn't believe in God is still having to use a great amount of faith to believe that all of this creation and the fine-tuning of creation just came about by random chance. So we have the clue of the first beginning, the origin, the Big Bang. The second clue is the cosmic welcome mat, that everything is prepared to support life. And clue number three, and I'm just going to do three today, there are more, but clue number three is the regularity of nature. Tim Keller writes in his book, all scientific inductive reasoning is based on the assumption of the regularity of the laws of nature, that water will boil tomorrow under the identical conditions of today. All right, everyone still with me here? We're talking about some deep things. Think back to science class. Okay, now how many of you actually enjoyed science class? Have some science. And how many of you copied the work of those who enjoyed science class in your class? Yeah, there's some honest ones here. Very good. Think back to the experiments that you did just, say, in high school science class. They were usually all very basic and simple stuff that you could take home and repeat yourself. But the question is, why were our teachers so confident that if we followed these experiments step by step, that we all would experience the same thing? That every single time the same result would happen. What about the next class period? Do you think, why were they so confident that the next class period would experience the same results from those experiments? Or maybe the class next year, and so on and so forth. You see, without the existence of a creator that regulates the laws of nature, how can anyone be sure that all of the laws of nature that worked today are going to work tomorrow? You see, the roots of modern science, the very foundation of modern science that takes for granted sort of this regulation or automation of the laws of nature, arose out of minds of philosophers and thinkers and theologians who were Christian, or at least believed in the existence of a God. And so, take for instance, Sir Isaac Newton. Right? You remember what he was known for? Known for discovering the laws of gravity, and there's another one I'm thinking of, motion, right? And I'm sure there's other things, there were a few other things, but you all got the big one, gravity, right? So Newton wasn't a Christian, but he believed in a creator. He believed in a first cause. He believed that this all didn't just come about by itself. And so for the one who doesn't believe in God, they still need a measure of faith every single day that gravity is going to keep them pinned to the earth today just like it did yesterday. How can they assume that these laws are just going to keep on going forever and ever by themselves? Who's controlling these things? And so the atheist has to lean on faith to believe that all of the laws of nature that have kept them alive today are going to be around tomorrow and will keep them alive tomorrow. And so as Christians, it's not that hard for us, right? We would say, He's got the whole world in His hands. He's got the whole world in His hands. He's got the whole world in His hands. He's got the whole world in His hands, right? It's not that hard, right? It takes so much more faith to believe that there's nothing behind the scenes that made this come about. And so, as we think about the three clues that we've shared, and there, like I said, there are more, and I'm going to send out a blog post, a link through the church email, and I'm going to post it on Facebook as well, of a few more clues if you want to dive into a few more things, but that'll be after this service later on. You may have noticed that the three clues that we talked about today really had a lot to do with the universe, with the created world around us. Everywhere we look in the created order, all across creation, we see purpose, we see meaning, we'd call it intelligent design, that there's some intelligence behind what we see, and we see beauty. Think of the universe as sort of a crime scene with God's fingerprints all over the place. There's not a scientist who can study creation and with all integrity and honesty say that they don't see fingerprints of something powerful behind what exists. Psalm 19, 1-4 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of His hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world that tell us there is a creator." Romans 1:20, Paul says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." And so Paul says that those who deny God's existence and creating power, he says they suppress the truth by their wickedness. The word suppress in the Greek means to basically to hold back, to retain, to detain, to restrain, to hinder, doing everything you can to keep the truth of God's existence behind closed doors. Almost like you've put too much in a closet as you're cleaning up before company comes over, right? And you can't get it shut, and so you're just putting all your weight on that door, right? That's the mental image of someone who would suppress the knowledge of God. We've got to keep that behind closed. I don't want to deal with the thought that there is a God or a creator, even though it is as plain as day. And so instead of submitting to the truth of God's existence, those who claim there is no God have to hide it away. I love the words of C.S. Lewis. If you've heard of C.S. Lewis before, he once was a prominent atheist who lived in England, who then became a Christian author, a preacher, a speaker. He's written a number of good books. But this is what C.S. Lewis says. He says, "We may ignore, but we can nowhere evade the presence of God." He says, "The world is crowded with him. He walks everywhere incognito." This is a former atheist become Christian. He says, we can't escape the reality, the presence of God all throughout creation. As Christians, we believe that God's Spirit fills the earth. There is no place on this earth where God's Spirit isn't wooing the hearts of men and women to become sons and daughters of the Creator. I love the words of the prophet Habakkuk in 2:14. He says, "The earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." I like that imagery. As the waters cover the sea. Is there anywhere where the waters don't cover the sea, right? And so Habakkuk says, one day the knowledge of the glory of God is going to cover the earth in that fashion. It's going to be all over the place. Now, notice what Habakkuk says is missing. He says it's not the glory of God that's missing. Right? Habakkuk doesn't say that it's the presence of God that's missing. He says it is the knowledge of God that's missing, that one day that knowledge will cover the earth. Or we might say the acknowledgement of the presence of God. But we believe that someday the knowledge of God's glory will cover this earth, surface to surface, all around the globe. Paul's words in Philippians 2:10 through 11, "At the name of Jesus, every knee will bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus is the Christ." There's coming a day, friends, where those who profess it today and those who are denying and suppressing it, we're all going to say it together. We're all going to worship. We're all going to cry out, "Holy, holy, holy." And so this is the hope that we profess and believe. But in the meantime, what are we to do with people in our lives that don't believe in God, who are atheists, maybe agnostic, maybe a skeptic? What can we possibly say to those who have heard all of the arguments, like my professor, perhaps even taught the arguments for 15 years, and then says, "I don't believe it," becomes an atheist? I want to give us just a few quick guide points for how we can relate to people in our life who are committed to the idea that there is no God, or perhaps even just questioning. And the first one is this: atheists and skeptics are not our enemy. Okay? Atheists and skeptics are not our enemy. We remember Paul's words from Ephesians 6:12. We wrestled not against flesh and blood. There are spiritual powers, there are principalities, there are things going on behind the scenes that we don't control, that we don't see. And so remember that your friends, your family, your coworkers, those who don't believe in God, they're not your enemy. You can love them just the same as you love someone in this church who does believe in God. Number two, the first and best tool for us as Christians when we want to be a witness to somebody is to pray. That's the best tool that you have in your toolkit, is to pray, pray, pray. You know, my theology professor who only wanted to pray one time, I think he was already wrestling with atheism at that time, right? Maybe he was wanting to avoid prayer at that time. I'd say don't pray once. I'd say pray every single day. Every single time the name of that person in you, whoever it is that you want them to come to know the knowledge and love of God for themselves, pray always without ceasing for them. And put them in God's hands. Three, when you speak with gentleness, speak with grace, speak with respect. And when you do share the hope that is within you. Why do you have hope? Why do you believe in Jesus? Forget what another scientist says. Forget what an academic person says. Why do you believe in Jesus? Why do you have hope? Share that and do it with gentleness and respect and grace. 4, remember, this is a big one for us as Christians, remember you can't force hope. You can't force joy or faith on anyone else. The only thing you can do is exhibit faith and hope and joy. You can't control what happens to somebody or what they do. You can only control what you do. And so if you exhibit joy and faith and hope and love, my friends, this kind of leads into the next one in number 5. Jesus living through you will be the greatest proof of God's existence to the people around you. Jesus living in you, the Spirit living in you, is the greatest proof. More than any other argument that could be shared today or any other time, if people see Jesus in you, there's no greater proof for the existence of God. And it may not happen immediately to somebody else, but make no mistake about it. That is what's going to change a heart more than an argument, more than a debate, more than getting mad at each other because you don't see things the same way. And then finally, 6, remember this: salvation belongs to our God. Salvation doesn't belong to us. We don't give it out. We're not in charge of making people saved. Salvation belongs to our God. Conversion is a work of the Spirit. So if someone is to go from a place of non-belief to belief, it's not because you were so convincing, right? It's not because you're so smart. It's because the Spirit is working through you. The Spirit is working through other situations. And ultimately, the Spirit is in charge of that life change in someone else. And so remember, God's not going to give up that search for his lost sheep. Pray, be respectful, be in relationship with those in your life who don't believe the same way. And then at the end of the day, guess what? Leave the results, leave the work, leave the accomplishments to the God who, if he created everything that we see, do you think he could change someone's heart and mind? Do you think if he created the stars and the moon, the sun, the mountains, the rivers, all of this entire thing, do you think he can move the heart and the mind of someone in your life that you love? I think so. And so, my friends, I'm just going to offer this to you to consider, to think and ponder. If there's someone here today that you have questions, you have doubts, you'd say, you know what, I'm a skeptic, and I'm not quite sure if I believe this. You are welcome in this place today. You're welcome in this place next Sunday. You're welcome in this place any single time, and you're just welcome to be a part of us as you seek and you ask questions, and we trust that at some point the knowledge of the existence of God will change your life. And so if you're in that place today and you want to talk to somebody and you want to partner with somebody, you can, after service, find myself. If there's somebody sitting around you today that you're like, man, I see God working in their life, and I'd like to know what's the hope? Why do they have hope in their life? Reach out to them and ask them. Until then, let's close the service. Let's stand up, and I'd like us to join our voices in the words of the Apostles' Creed. It's the word creed means I believe. And this is the very basics of what we believe as Christians. And so let me just invite us to join our voices in this morning. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. I believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord. He was conceived by the power of the Holy Spirit and born of the Virgin Mary. He suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended to the dead. On the third day he rose again. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father. He will come again to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen.